All right, welcome to the Evolving Potential Podcast, episode number 3. We have here with me John Peralta, flow researcher, citizen scientist, human performance coach, former personal trainer, massage therapist, currently running these really cool retreats in Costa Rica that I'll let him talk about. Someone that I'm really excited to get on the podcast, someone who I originally discovered through his really freaking cool videos on his flow experiments Instagram. This guy's got video editing skills that I wish I had, and I've been very excited to talk with him in person. We've had a couple of talks over messages. We've had pretty extensive talks. There's not a lot of people that I'm able to talk to on this level, and so I'm really excited to have John here with me. I'm thinking we can start by asking John what he just was doing in Costa Rica.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for having me. This is an honor and just a delight just to speak freely and have the space to dialogue with you. And yeah, I remember you hitting me up actually on Instagram while I was in Costa Rica, even a few years ago, perhaps at this point. And I was showing my partner, I was like, look at this. It's happening. It's working. People are seeing, and we should keep going. So here we are, a few years down the road, continuing to take trips down to Costa Rica for honestly a lot of resetting, rebooting our nervous system, our sort of stuck mental programs, a lot of self-worth or confidence, a lot of really resorting and finding new perspectives. And we always come back refreshed, reset, and having so much more clarity. So I'm excited to be on the other side of incredible experience. My partner ran a week-long retreat, and we brought in a shaman or a curandero or a page from Brazil, and he is from a Yawanawa tribe. And so he brings his culture, his medicine, his songs, his energy, and we get to be in that with him for a week. We got to do a Temescal sweat lodge on day 1, which was a bit impromptu, spontaneous for the reason that we didn't plan it or know that he offered it, but he offered it and we went for it because that is an incredible opportunity if you ever have one to sit with somebody who really knows what they're doing and facilitates, a deep dive into, I call my pain cave, but essentially a place where my ego shuts up and goes quiet. And I really enjoy that. To be pushed really hard usually is intense, usually heat or cold. And we can get into that sort of technology later, but they can take you into some places where you come out the other end feeling reborn. And that's the idea, is to really go through that with a group, come out feeling alive and connected to each other, and then of course to the earth, because part of a sweat lodge is to be down on the ground in the dirt, really trying to just breathe through it and stick with the process. So that was day 1. Then we had 2 nights of ceremonies with ayahuasca, which for anybody who maybe is just coming across this and just hearing the word about it and finding it mysterious. Please. It is mysterious, and we can unravel a lot of the mystery and make it more tangible for people, but it really is a powerful plant medicine that comes from the Amazon. Many different parts, Brazil, Peru, Ecuador, Colombia, are carrying this medicine and bringing it out of the jungle and even inviting us down to the jungle. And the whole prophecy about the West and the sort of, the mental disassociation that we have to nature and empathy towards ourselves and each other, and this disconnect. And so they bring this medicine for the mind, for the Western mind, and for anybody really dealing with depression, anxiety, PTSD, or just unsure, like not understanding what the point is anymore, which I guess is kind of nihilism or nihilistic. I've experienced all those flavors. And then I go sit in a ceremony with powerful plant teacher and a powerful shaman or facilitator, and really feel alive again, feel reborn, feel like I'm connected back to my heart, back to my highest self, and start to understand more about my purpose, or at least find more meaning in my life so that I can live more purposefully. So it's a whole process. So a lot of people are afraid of it, and they should be. I always go in very nervous. It requires that you are, yeah, really intentional and understand why you would want to do such a thing. But yeah, that's what we've been doing in Costa Rica. I just supported this last one. It was a women's retreat, and I'm so honored because I grew my hair out. I can join the women. No, I'm just kidding. I feel I feel very much like we are, yeah, reaching a point where it wasn't meant to be a women's retreat. Men were invited, men almost came, and they are still very afraid to go deep and connect on that level. And women crave community and have dealt with lots of trauma and have a lot of healing and seek it out. And they look for community, they look for these alternative forms of therapy. So women are very drawn to this right now, and it's helping them a lot. And men need this more than ever, especially the ones who are ready to end it and ready to exit the game. Men who are really hitting rock bottom right now and questioning it. Men who might snap. Anybody who's ever felt the pressure to the point where they don't even understand what's right or wrong or up or down or what should be done or anymore, just full confusion. Men who are dealing with toxic programming and conditioning, telling them that they're not good enough and they need to act a certain way. And men who are just like really lost and unable to feel anything, feel emotions, are deeply in need of this. And I hope that they also feel that they can go there and have the same level of healing and freedom from their own sort of, yeah, stuckness and unworthiness that we all feel weighing on us. And rarely do we want to sift through it, peeling
Yeah.
back the layers to see it. But for sure it's there and it's calling. And what's really cool right now is it's calling celebrities for one, and then specifically NFL players. Many people have heard Aaron Rodgers speak openly about it, and how it's changed his life and how he's now able to show up and be a team leader in a better way because he can now love himself and operate from that place, and that he can love his team members more fully and lead from that place. So he's spoken freely about it. And then another one, Jordan Poyer, who is an incredible human, and just recently, as last year, even started sitting, and now this year is literally right now as we speak, sitting with Aaron Rodgers in Costa Rica in ceremony. So I'm sending them love and really calling out to all the other brothers out there watching football, that you're about to start seeing some serious magic as these guys start to speak openly and freely about how it's changed their life. So stay tuned for that. And then really the rest of us who maybe are just now catching on that this is even an option or an opportunity or a doorway, an alternative doorway to a different destination. Maybe start reading and looking into it and just doing some research, because before you freaking decide to do this, you should probably sit with it a while.
Yeah.
Yeah. And really
Yeah.
sit with why.
So that's perfect place to ask a question then. So where did you begin to get into all this? I know that I've seen, some of your content discussing the friction that you were facing, the stuckness that you were in, and how discovering this was life-changing for you. And so, if someone wants to begin on their own journey of making these discoveries, Where might they begin, or how might they notice that they're also stuck in that place of friction and not feeling flow?
Well, and I love that you brought it back to that. So I'll try to put a flow framework to all this because it all happened at the same time for me. So I like throw words out and stuff like that. And if you want me to clarify anything, I will. But basically, I found flow before ayahuasca for sure. So I found flow in my life through fitness. And there is a such thing as an exercise induced flow state where you can work out to the point of exhaustion that your frontal lobe and your judgmental analytical mind does go quiet. And that's why I now seek out these sweat lodges, these really intense doorways to altered states. Exercise used to be my favorite. It doesn't serve me the same way as it used to, which is why you don't see me posting all about it on my Instagram these days. But
Yeah.
that is a doorway, and I worked really hard to like cut it out and make sure I knew exactly how the key lock and key mechanism worked, and exactly how much pre-workout and how much all the supplements and everything I needed, so that when it was time, boom, this shuts up. I'm in the zone. I do my workout. Maybe I do 3 a day. It didn't matter. I was addicted. So it was really, just one thing after another. And then I ended up moving back to Colorado to be a personal trainer, worked my butt off in the gym just to find out I was still unhappy. Gym life is not everything. And it's very like high school mentality in a lot of ways. And so I felt stuck in that. I felt more friction. And I was so frustrated. I got all these certifications and credentials and they don't matter. So I was like, I'm going to move to the mountains and pursue just finding how I would create like a structure for people or for myself that isn't in the gym, that is more free. And so I moved up here. Right now I'm in Breckenridge, and actually didn't work out even for 2 years, but I worked at the rec center. I stepped back from personal training. I took a 2-year break, which I do recommend. If a lot of people don't realize it, especially when they start out, they get really into something and they think I have to do as much of this as I can, and then, maybe a career will form. But if you kind of look at it like, instead of sprinting, you can run a marathon, then you can take 2 years off and come back. And then you can take 3 years off and come back. And then you can, like, over and over, I've just taken time off. And every time I do, I come back with like a whole nother perspective on it. So 2 years at that time was really nice. I come back with a whole new idea for training, specifically adaptability. So the ability to adapt to any and everything, so that
Love
you
that.
can, yeah, so that you can prevent falling. Because I was like, well, most injuries happen, especially in the mountains, they happen from falling. So if you can prevent falling, then you're going to prevent most injuries. However, when you do that, which a lot of people get away with for many, many years, they don't fall, or they don't fall hard enough, and you get your skill high enough, then your skill outweighs your durability. So your ability to actually handle a fall, to take a fall, to get
So you
up.
might want to mention real quick. I don't know if how much of our crowd knows that you mountain bike,
Mm.
snowboard. What is there anything else we're missing?
Everything and anything I could, rock climbing and kayaking, and I'm trying to mix some. I have a mountain bike with skis on it, so it's like skiing on a mountain bike. I like anything and everything I can go fast down. A mountain on, I will try to master, because I'm addicted to speed being my favorite way to enter flow, because it just scares the shit out of you. If you're not in flow, go faster. And if you fall, then that's a problem. And so really I found I found out that I'm not invincible. I came out of my 20s at I was 28, and I took the biggest fall of my life I went over the handlebars going off the biggest jump I've ever been on my mountain bike. I slammed. I got really lucky because I rolled and saved my collarbone, but I hit the back and my hip mostly. So really messed my hip up and had to take like months of recovery time. And I really started to think more about durability. Because adaptability will keep you upright. It'll keep you adapting. It keeps you very quick on your feet. And so you work on a lot of stability, but you also include hand-eye coordination and reflexes and things that are more jarring, like bands, like you put a band around your waist and have someone pull on it in all directions, or you have somebody literally throw things at you like dodgeballs or an actual big, what are they called, stability ball, that you get bumped with it. So you have an external stimuli that you have to adapt to. And the idea is not to completely be thrown off. It's to get right to where you're about to be thrown off, and you recover, you save it over and over and over. So my favorite training tool is a slack line for that reason. And you make it as hard as possible, but you remain in that sweet spot, which is a flow primer, is to find the sweet spot and try to stay there. And it's a balance thing. I mean, you can literally apply it to balance training and stability training, but then you can also apply it to every other aspect of your life. So I had adaptability. I really got into that and researched it. And there's tons of books that are out already on it, which is great, but not necessarily taking the whole approach of adaptability, looking at the human species as the most adaptable mammals on this planet, which is why we're at the top of the food chain. It's because we are adapting all the time to every possible scenario. And the rest of the animals, unfortunately, don't adapt very quickly. We seem to have escaped, or maybe we're meant to just continue so that we can steward this planet, hopefully not destroy it. But that became my central theme for training. And then the next one was durability. So I had to really get back to like, oh yeah, like I got to lift weights because actually I need to be durable. I need to have stronger tendons and ligaments and connective tissue, which means powerlifting, but doing it right, doing it from a stable foundation and a solid core, and all the stabilizers being able to fire first before main movers. So like really dissecting movement down into like, how do I train my nervous system to adapt while at the same time training my musculoskeletal system to be durable. And then the last element came later. During COVID lockdown, I went to Costa Rica for a ayahuasca retreat, and COVID lockdown happened, and they said you can go home or you can stay. And I was like, well, everything's closed, I'm going to stay. Nice. So I got stuck there for 7 months and really, really explored alternative. I wouldn't call it all therapies, but really alternative practices that happen to also be therapeutic for training the mind-body connection, training really mental focus, clarity, and the ability to get to what I would look at as like get out of my own way. So that's a tough one, but like essentially to train the ability to not judge myself, or if I mess up, to not care. So it was like a lot of mental training, which led me into, oh yeah, like when I feel my best and perform my best, I'm in flow, sure, but I'm also very playful, and which means that I need to train my playful attitude and my ability to look at everything from the lens of like a child, or like just awe and wonder and not judgment, or like criticize all the time, which a lot of us do, and rather be in this place of curiosity. Right.
Yeah. See so I actually had a guest on, James Leith, who works with Exos, works with NFL athletes.
They get it.
It's a big team building thing. And so it's like he literally teaches people that, and that's not something that's very understood, is like that childlike behavior being so important, that state of mind being so crucial to really, moving forward and really being able to learn. And so I was actually going to ask you that, because I have seen all these different things that you're doing, the slack line and the mountain biking and the snowboarding and everything in between. And so it's like that obviously requires it's like the ability of learning to learn is something I'm very interested in, because learning is the best skill you can have: learning, unlearning, relearning. And so you seem to have a pretty good formula for trying new things, getting fairly good at them, and pushing through whatever it is that you're going through mentally during that process. And so I was going to ask you, how have you trained, I guess, that process of being able to teach yourself something new, or get through that process of, oh, holy shit, I suck at this thing, but I'm going to push through it and continue to get better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll try my hardest to answer that, because that has so much to do with like even how I was raised, maybe, or like growing up and stuff, and how you decide what, one day decide to never grow up. Okay, so you just mentioned one of my favorite books that I read at the very beginning of my journey into all this, which is called The Only Skill That Matters. You probably read it. It's exactly that. It's that the only skill that actually matters is the skill of learning. And learning is a skill. And it's a good book because it's like yay big, and it only has like, 3 main messages, and some of them are like really applicable for where you're at, and other times it's like later on it becomes more applicable. But the biggest skill I saw at the beginning was learning. And so I did a couple things to set myself up to learn better and faster and retain it. And one was, I was watching a lot of like impact theory with Tom Bilyeu, and these like guys, these very entrepreneurial guys, and he would interview them, and all of them wrote a book. Every single one that he interviews, he's like, I read your book. And it's like, oh, well, I should probably be reading every single one of these books. And I suck at reading because I grew up dyslexic. So I think I was 26 when I just said nothing is going to get in my way of reading, because I think it's possibly, other than the skill of learning, it is the skill of learning, because if you can't read, you can't really learn.
Right.
Or at least your brain wouldn't organize the material the same. And the better you are at reading, the better you are at organizing all that material into places to pull it up immediately on demand. You file it away better, your vocabulary increases, and you are able to like relate things to ideas that other people had. And I'm still working on being able to say whose ideas they were. That's a whole nother one. But like the more you read, the more this skill improves. So I caught on to that, started reading like a maniac every day. It's part of my morning routine. It's the first thing I do in the day because I won't do it otherwise. I read dry material, I read dense research, and I love it, but it took years and years of not loving it. So I highly recommend that one. If anybody is taking their sort of personal growth seriously, I would take reading very seriously. But in the playful way of like, I don't care what I read as long as I learn something. So I don't read fiction unless it's like The Alchemist. If you haven't read that book, it's not even fiction, people. But anyways, so I really started to read things like, I think Stealing Fire came to me. A friend mentioned it. He's like, you would love this book. And I sure did.
I love
and
that
in
book.
that book, he mentions The Rise of Superman. He mentions Flow by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. I mean, he's mentioning book after book after book, because that is a huge compilation of a lot of other people's work. He does a really good job of presenting it. He got me really stoked on Flow and gave me a framework, because I was just living up here in the mountains, living as much of it as I could, but not really understanding how to harness it, and then how to sort of help people, I guess, reorient their lives in a way that would just naturally produce more flow. So I started that process, which was like a lot of sticky notes. I got so into, and whiteboards were like, I still have a whiteboard. It's the whole wall now, because you can just go to Lowe's and get yourself like a freaking white piece of like, I don't know what it is. It covers showers. You just write all over it. Like, don't go spend lots of money. But if you don't have a whiteboard wall, I highly recommend it.
That's
Spreading
awesome.
it out, and really making it as visual as possible. And then the sticky notes allows you to like move it around. Okay, now I want it in this category over here. And doing a lot of mind mapping without even realizing it was mind mapping is a thing. I was just getting it out of my brain onto a wall. I don't know who it was. I think had to have been Impact Theory with Tom Bilyeu, man. He's had so many good people on, but one of them at the beginning really was driving home the point of grit and leaning into to the suck. This is like Jocko Willing. This is like some David Goggins level
Yep.
suck. Right. So like leaning in, like really, really gritting your teeth, leaning in and just doing it and shutting up about it. And so that's like a masculine mentality, not always necessary. It's not always the approach. I remember also there's a movement, one of my absolute favorite movement. I'm going to call him a guru. He hates probably being called that. Ido Portal. If you haven't heard of this guy, oh boy, he is quite the guy. So he has his own movement, ideology, and everything. It comes from a lot of like Brazilian dance, Brazilian dance martial arts like capoeira. And the way he moves is completely free. So he worked with a number of athletes now to help them unlock. I mean, these are top level athletes, and he's helped them unlock even better and more sophisticated movement. So his whole thing is like movement sophistication. But the way that you gain movement sophistication, and this is above coordination, like you go to I'm coordinated. All right. But how sophisticated is your movement? Are you an X Games level athlete? Because that's some sophisticated movement.
Yeah.
Are you a gymnast? Are like these are seriously sophisticated movers. And the way that you do this is by always training up until the point where you're good, and then doing something like putting in a stimuli that makes you suck again. Training that till you're good, increase the stimuli or the difficulty or the volume or the fatigue or the weight or like you just keep progressing until you suck again, and then you do it again and again and again. So you never get good. It's a horrible training. You never feel proficient. You just suck. And actually, now that I'm talking about it, it reminds me of how I was growing up with video games, where all my friends who bought consoles or got consoles for Christmas and got video games, they got really good. And I was never allowed to play video games, which is probably why I became a movement guy. Because my parents forced me to play outside, and never got good at video games, but I played every chance we got with my friends at their house. I played video games and I lost, and they never wanted to have me on their team because I'd just be the easy target. And so I was, but I learned how to have fun sucking at them. Like really, like I didn't give up. I would just be like, I don't care. Like I'm going to try this now and try that and mess with them or go rogue and, go crazy on my own team members. So it's a different approach. It's a very like, who cares mentality. Even sports in high school, I eventually got to a point where I was like, who cares if it's a win or a loss? I'm just out here having fun. And a lot of people take things very seriously. So I started to like not take it all so seriously, which is also why it was difficult for me to like finish college in 4 years and jump on some career track. So I think a lot of it is who I am as a human, and growing up dyslexic and wanting to, just have fun and not win all the games and stuff like that, really in my adult life has allowed me to just not take myself so seriously. And when I do take myself seriously, I start to get into some serious mental muck that requires serious tools to draw from and work myself out of.
See, and that's so crucial right there, is like that is almost counterintuitive to what you would be taught as like a high performer, is like the results are everything, the performance is everything. You really have to take this seriously, whereas I think mental performance coaches nowadays are really focused on the joy, the love, the passion, and really just like not being focused on the results. And so it's like to have to literally burn that into someone's brain because they've learned the opposite way of you. It's like literally a paradigm shift. And so for me, it's so important to really get that across in the podcast, is to show people that when you really just focus on the process, when you just really focus on finding the thing that you love within it, then that's when you actually perform your best. Being able to really push that challenge to skill ratio, because that's what it sounds like you were discussing, where it's like, okay, well, now you've reached this point, where you're good at something. And so now we're going to increase the challenge. And now you are forced to increase your skill. And then it's just like this climbing the ladder of increasing your challenge and skill which we both know when you hit that above 4% of that challenge skill ratio, you're in flow. And so it's like, I think they're kind of like getting themselves in flow, then pushing themselves out of it, and getting themselves in flow and pushing themselves out of it, and regularly increasing, whether it's sophistication of movement or just, skill with anything. Like that's so cool to me.
Exactly. And you're actually talking specifically about the flow cycle, which comes out of the creativity cycle, which is a lot of like focus and then rest, like narrow focus and then wide focus, narrow focus and wide focus. But the flow cycle that you're talking about is well worth researching. There's a whole book that is never mentioned, and I don't know why the flow guys who have self-proclaimed themselves in this field, they don't mention so much this book. And I always question it. And whenever I get a chance to talk to one of these guys, I'm going to bring this guy up because there's something interesting. But the Breakout Principle by Dr. Herbert Benson is
I wrote that down, man.
One of the
That's
original guys. I mean, you talk about Mihai Csikszentmihalyi and how much he did to bring the flow research. I mean, I got my book right there, and
yeah, mine's back there too.
And how much he's done is amazing. And then for whatever reason, the guys who are now rehashing all this research are not mentioning Dr. Herbert Benson. I don't know why. I'd love to find out. But he really brought this flow cycle. He didn't even call it a flow cycle because he called it the breakout principle. But basically, it's the same stuff, that we hit a point of where our skill is too low and the challenge is so high that we can burn out, we get anxiety, we get in over our heads. If you stick with it and you keep sucking, like for me, it's guitar right now.
Nice.
You gain skill slowly, and then all of a sudden you start to get to the little flow pockets, and they are really short. They're really small pockets, but you get in there and you experience it. You're like, oh, that was it. And all of a sudden you get some dopamine, which is more excitement, more motivation to keep going. You get excited. And you might suck for months or years even still, but you get little bits. So flow is very short acting in the beginning stages, and you get a lot of friction and a lot of struggle. And it's a loading phase. So when it's a creativity cycle, when it's a creative activity like art or music, but art being a very like quiet inner creative process happening, it's a loading phase. So it takes a lot of time. You struggle for a while, and then when you hit that release, that point of I'm getting it, and you're like, someone look, someone record, someone turn on a phone, like I'm ready, like oh my god, you hit that point. It's called release. So you get a whole rush or a whole bunch of nitric oxide, which has been shown to release or flush out cortisol. So you release nitric oxide, you flush out cortisol. You feel like, oh my God, this is what I worked so hard for. I cannot even believe the moment has arrived. And if you don't overthink it or overanalyze, then you can drop into flow and you can spend some good amount of time there. And when I always say flow is flow, or it is said, I believe, I will give Stephen Kotler credit for this because I believe he says flow follows focus. However, I will challenge that because the guys who are so in flow, they don't stare at their slack line 100 feet in the air. They're looking where they're going. A mountain biker flying down a hill, he's not focusing on his bike. He's just looking where he's going. And so in that sense, you follow focus. But I'm always like, but it's the guys who can look up and look around. Yeah, that's where flow really is. Doesn't mean they're in their head thinking about it. It means that their focus has now expanded past the narrow point of focusing solely on the activity. Their action and awareness have fully merged, and they can now look around. And like, that's the guy you want to follow. And you're like, I want to go into the jungle with that guy. That's cool. I'm working on that one. I'm still in a narrow focus with a lot of this, and especially with like things that are new. When they're novel, when they're new, they're difficult. You don't know what to expect, and you you're often like propelled into a whole different almost reality. It's like traveling to a foreign country that gives you culture shock. You're just like, well, we better learn quick.
Yeah.
And I love that. Travel is one of the best flow activities there are for that very reason. So sticking with the process, knowing that there is a flow cycle, knowing where you are in the flow cycle tremendously helps so that you can identify, oh, this is some serious friction. I guess I need to step back, maybe even take a break for a minute, come back with more patience. Okay. I'm getting it, but I'm not, there's something missing. I'll go smoke some weed. I'm in flow, but like I'm getting tired and I want to milk it. I'm going to do a round of breath work. Like there are so many tools to go through a flow cycle. And then of course the end I didn't mention, which is just as important, is the recovery phase. You have to unwind. Your nervous system cannot be taxed fully for too long before something goes wrong. So you got to unwind, you got to decompress, you got to recover. And that can take a couple minutes before you do another flow cycle, especially if you're doing something that is cyclical like that or repetitive. Or it can be a whole recovery of like a whole week. Like Kat and I went to Costa Rica for 2 weeks, had beautiful ceremonies, but we lacked in sleep. That's always a downside to like doing a lot of these ceremonies, is you don't get the sleep. So on the back end, a week later, you're like, oh yeah, we're recovering. we feel good mentally, but physically we are lacking sleep. Okay. So recovery has to happen before another flow cycle can occur. I guess the idea that not a lot of people talk about, that this guy Ido Portal really drives home, is the beginner's mindset. Always be a beginner. In fact, if you ever think you're an expert, watch out, because really experts stop learning. So I hesitate to ever use the word expert. I think you can have expertise, and you of course are an expert in your own experience, but that's limited always. So the word expert for me carries a feeling of, oh, you stopped learning. So a lot of these flow experts, and that's kind of what I'm hesitating, and I won't ever mention names too much because everyone's on their own journey, but there's a lot of flow experts out there right now, and I would say be hesitant, because like it's just their expertise and they might be bringing in all kinds of research and things, but like if you really look through their sources and the sources they cite in the back of their books, you realize, oh wait, none of this is solid. This is all very theoretical. Okay. So these guys that want to sell you these expensive training courses and programs, they are kind of going off of a lot of other people's theories. And so maybe in this flow world, it's important to do your own research, which would require a lot of experimenting and using other people's knowledge and foundation to do that, but really knowing that for you, flow will occur, in whatever way or capacity that you're able to achieve it. So it's different for every person. But I'll say,
Yes.
oh
Let's talk about that, because
yeah,
that's exactly kind of what you do at these events. Is like there's a
yeah,
number of flow triggers and things that help people get into flow
yeah,
naturally, and they are naturally different for everyone. Yeah.
yeah,
And so it's like really understanding and doing that experimentation is, what I saw in your book too. It was a great, really cool framework, in his book, that kind of allows you to know what the tools are. It kind of goes over some of the science, allows you to begin experimenting on yourself, and ultimately allows you to eventually create your own flow formula. And so I would love to hear, your kind of take on that, of how you take people through that, how you kind of like lay out stuff for them, if you will, give them a groundwork to work from, and then letting them experiment. And then the different M's you talk about, movement, meditation, music, and those things.
yeah. So performance, which I didn't realize was such a distasteful word for creatives, by the way. performance is relative to the individual and completely unrealistic to anybody else. So you can never compare yourself to another. Now, the way that normal performance is broken down with like athletic performance or musical performance, they have broken things down into criteria to be judged. And in that sense, you can somewhat decide, oh, that's a high performer or peak performer. But in reality, this is an individual process, and nobody can tell you how to perform better, because better is completely relative to you and where you are and where you were and where you want to go. And that changes every damn day. So David Goggins can calm down, and everybody can take a breath and realize that this is a lifelong journey of just evolving, just evolution. This is an evolutionary process that you could be passive. You could do nothing and you will still evolve, because that's what humans do. That is in our DNA. Now, there are certain forces that are possibly creating de-evolution. We're not going to get into that. We're focusing on where we want to go. So if you start with your why and your intention, and you leave the details to the universe, and you leave the timeline open, you will grow. There's no doubt in my mind, because that's almost basically all I've done, is just like really. And there are times where I'm impatient. Don't get me wrong. I'm a very impatient person. It's one of my greatest lessons to get through my 30s and be a more patient human into my 40s. But I feel the weight of like the world pushing me to just continue building momentum and moving in a direction. And then all of a sudden the universe is like, no, you're going way too far down that direction, and course correct, pivot. A lot of us have to do that. And so does that mean I'm not performing well? Oh, well, yeah, according to how I was before COVID, but am I performing better in other areas of my life? Yeah. So performance is relative. So if you broaden your definition of it, for one, that will help relieve a lot of the stress and tension, or the need to prove yourself through performance, for one. Essentially, this idea of peak performance or ultimate human performance is like chasing your own tail. And it took me a long time to realize. I mean, all of my 20s, I was trying to be a peak performer and really perform at a high level. And I did, but who cares? So am I happy? Yeah. Did my performance in any way add to my happiness? Not in the long run, no. But did I gain skills by trying to harness flow? Absolutely. So there are certain skills you can develop that can absolutely increase performance and in every way, in every capacity of your life. But one is to really just start to, like I said, lay things out in front of you, starting with your why. Why are you doing this? And then for the how, really trying to figure out what are the simplest, the lowest hanging fruit that's free. The low hanging fruit is on the ground, by the way. It's free. Okay. You don't even need to climb a tree. Just go get it. It's in your tap. It's your tap water. Just drink enough of it.
I loved your tree of training idea. I loved that in the book, by the way. Fancy fruit, formal fruit, free fruit. Yeah, feel free to talk about that.
Yeah, I just call it a tree of training. When you start to set this stuff up, because training is one of the skills. Training is a skill. It's just like the skill of learning. It's like, everyone thinks training is a verb, but it's also the freaking point. The point of it all is to train these things so that you evolve, but ultimately don't care so much about when and how. So picking the fruit, and for where I was at when I started, I had no clue. I just was like, oh man, there's so much out there. So I started with the sticky notes on the wall, and I put them into categories. And then I started to realize that these categories all started with the letter M. And that's something that I didn't notice right away, but that I was like, these are like the way my brain is latching onto these is like they're called alliterations. So they're all M words.
Alliterations.
They're all A words, or So they're not acronyms. An acronym is a word made up of other words that mean something. These are alliterations. And I started to collect these M words, especially because like I'm a massage therapist. I know, we're always talking about meditating. We're meditating a lot, and I'm a movement guy, and see others like the musicians are just killing it and they get into flow all the time. And yeah, and so these M's became the main methods. So movement, music, meditation, medicine, and mindset. And mindset being a playful mindset, a curious mindset, open-mindedness, being able to both have narrow, laser sharp focus and open, broad focus. So like mindset was super important at the beginning. And I worked with all kinds of biotech and anything I could get my hands on to help my meditations and my mindset, my mind become more clear and calm. And yeah, then medicine was right there at the beginning because of nutrition being, food is medicine. Is that sustenance, substance, and supplements. And sustenance being food and nutrition, getting quality food, nutrition, and supplements being what you don't get through your food for your diet, you would supplement. And you could supplement all kinds of nootropics. But then I was like, well, maybe I should have its own category for substances, and that be more of the molecules that we want to work with, right? So how do we open up those altered states, not to the point where you're in another dimension, but open that altered state to where flow can come through, because flow is on the other side of our normal waking state of consciousness, which is how, like, it's the template we see the world. It's the way our whole orientation is programmed. And if you can get past normal waking state of consciousness, there's tons of altered states. And so these molecules can take us there, or you could take food out completely and you can fast. And that's a doorway to an altered state. So it became a lot of like finding these breadcrumbs, putting them in these categories, and then really figuring out which way to alter my consciousness and how much to get the result I desired. So that's where then the experimenting really, really kicked in. And some of those experiments, I would never recommend anyone ever repeat. I will never repeat them. Some of them I recommend everybody does. And I'm always like, hey, have you heard about the tennis ball? Like how much it can help you with your tight hips and low back and help you feel better. And you can throw it and you can catch it. And now all of a sudden your reaction speed, and then you can play games. It's like a tennis ball. I tell literally everyone about it. Nobody understands the power in a tennis ball, except dogs who are in flow all the time.
That's hilarious.
So really these main methods became the came out of the mind mapping and became the first flow formula. But I had to step back and realize that you can't do all of these every single day. And a lot of these are also flow activities in and of themselves, music. So how do I train it to have more access to other flows or other flow flavors? Because that's another topic nobody really discusses, is how flavorful flow can be, how rich the experience is. Of course, we talk about the richness of it, right? That's one of the main ways to tell if you're in flow is richness. It's a rich experience, just packed with meaning and packed with connection. And it's also a timeless experience. You lose track of time. It speeds up, slows down. It's a selfless experience because you don't think about yourself. You're not judging yourself. And then that richness is really a quality to look for. And so I started to really fine tune my senses and look for these flavors of flow, and found them in a lot of areas of my life. And then I found I was really seriously lacking music. So I've really worked on that one. But there's all kinds. I mean, shoot, I still got to learn to paint one day.
Why don't you, I'm curious about the idea of altered states and altered traits, right? And so what would you say that you've either witnessed in others in their ability to alter their traits through these altered states, or what have been your experiences of altering your traits through these altered states? How's it changed you?
So this is a specific approach that I found by doing reading everyone else's work on flow and finding that there's only a few people that take this angle. And it's mentioned in, I think, Stealing Fire and Recapture the Rapture. Jamie Wheel does a really good job at laying this out, big picture, how to go from an altered state to an altered trait, but he doesn't really drive that home. And so I found that point can be driven even further by really looking at the monks who spent their lives meditating. There's a book called Altered Traits. I highly recommend it because it looks at these monks back when they first were in the 70s, when they were really figuring out that these lifelong meditators had something the rest of us didn't. And so they started to really research them, and they had control of their autonomic nervous system, and they could literally stop their heartbeat and do all this stuff. And they were like, well, this is beyond an altered trait, an altered trait, or I'm sorry, this is beyond an altered state. An altered state, it comes and it goes. It's fleeting. It's temporary. It's transient. It shifts all the time. In fact, there's tons of states of consciousness. We're in the different state all the time. There's waking, there's creative, there's meditative, there's dreaming, there's deep dreaming, there's full-on hallucinating. These are states of consciousness. And they looked at these monks and they go, but these guys are living it. This is their life. They are actually, they have these traits. These are no longer states. It is a trait of consciousness. So these guys are walking around living, because their goal is enlightenment, of course, which is a whole nother discussion I would love to have with some serious Buddhist folk, because we're all chasing our own tail, including monks. But I believe that they are harnessing flow. They are living more present. They are experiencing emotions without filters. So they just feel, and they can let go, or, they're working through attachments, which is the identification of you versus everything separate from you. And so much of Buddhism is flow. Actually, one of my biggest realizations was Buddhists have a lot of flow principles, but Zen is a whole flow mastery path that you could take. You could just study Zen and you'd have so much flow in your life. So really looked at these Eastern paths, these Eastern ways of honestly living, that I saw them as flow philosophies. Really, you can set yourself up to have a flow state in your life, or a flow state in the moment. You can try to have as much flow as you want for a workflow to be productive, to be creative. Or you can apply this to your entire life. You can develop a flow philosophy and you can live it. And so there's another book called Living in Flow. Sky Isaac Nelson, not sure why or how, I guess his name is just so out there it sticks, but this guy wrote a whole book about synchronicities and how synchronicities are the way the universe tells you if you're in flow or not. So more another framework for people to look at, but basically really looking at how we can develop traits, lasting traits versus temporary states. And that's why the first chapter of the playbook I put out is all about the state of the flow state. And it's flow theory, and it's all theory, and it's very hard to actually prove any of this scientifically. They've proved it through the psych world. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, being a researcher, proved it as a actual state of consciousness. However, proving how it happens or when it happens or that it's the same every time has been super difficult. So most of it's theorized, and it's a state being temporary is a theory. My theory that I like to overlay on that is that you can live in flow by really adopting these as flow traits and really then cultivating traits. So in one of the sections in there is what other traits to cultivate, because flow isn't the only one, and it's not going to give you necessarily lasting happiness either. So there's a lot of these that we can work on, but I feel like I'm getting a little bit sidetracked.
Since we can't, physically, since it's a lot of theory, since we can't actually know the subjective state of flow, there is scientific correlates that we can look at, which is, so when you brought up the book Altered Traits and the monks, I personally came to that information through the book called The Greatest Power in the Universe by U.S. Anderson. If you haven't read that book, I highly recommend that one. He's the same guy who wrote The Three Magic Words. And he talks about like them being able to produce long trains of alpha waves, and that being one of the things that they noticed, being a big difference. And so having a somewhat of an understanding of brain waves, having beta be up at a higher range and then alpha and then theta and then delta, it's like these, in our current world, we seem to be experiencing a whole lot of high beta, very analytical, very me versus them, and disconnected, dysregulated. And so I think that I would assume that some of your work has been related to getting yourself out of beta, getting yourself more into an alpha state, with potentially the ability to measure that. And that's where the experimentation comes through, in terms of like neurofeedback, doing HRV, heart rate, and all those correlates of flow. And so would you be willing to talk about some of the things that you've noticed that are correlates of flow, that allow people to know, okay, yeah, I'm getting closer. Yeah, I'm like moving away from this dysregulated, stressed out space that I've been in, and I can physically see that.
Yeah, absolutely. So flow as a subjective experience is it'd be like qualia. There's a quality to it. You can't quantify it, but you can certainly talk about the quality of it. So we said selflessness, timelessness, effortless, and richness. This is Jamie Wheel's work. I love that he put them into these nice categories for us, but also the sense of presence, expanded awareness, the feeling of spirit, the presence of something higher, connection to something greater. So that's like the mystical stuff that these other guys don't really talk about as much, and that's kind of what I'm discussing too. But on a objective or more actual biological, physiological correlate level, it's all biofeedback. I mean, these guys freaking did it decades ago. They just didn't call it flow. In fact, you probably know exactly what they call it, if there's like an actual moment or like time period or state that there is. But in HRV being heart rate variability, measuring the variability of your heart. When you have low variability, it typically means that you are more in fight or flight, or the sympathetic side of the nervous system, because there's more racing, like heart rates starting to beat more regularly. But when you're like cool, calm, and collected, or I like to say cool as a cucumber, then you have all this variability where your heart doesn't beat at exactly the same pace, because you're in a parasympathetic rest and digest place. And really that's where flow is. And in fact, flow is right in between. And you'll almost always get your heart rate up at some point and drop it back down. So it's like, that's why it's so hard to like specifically say, this is the moment I was in flow. It's like, well, 10 minutes before that was a loading phase and yada, yada, yada.
Yeah,
so really though, if you want to train this, like, and you're like, oh yeah, I know I should do music and meditation, I know I should do some breath work, but it's like, you can just focus on biofeedback. You get yourself a heart rate monitor, and you work with an app that gives you an HRV breathing to start with. And after a while, you can even calculate your own HRV breathing, but it's always going to be in average within other people's averages. So it is more specific to the person, to the individual, which I like, but it gives very grounded, well-researched, tangible tools. So if you look into HRV breathing or biofeedback breathing, you'll get into flow for sure, because flow is found at the sweet spot of your fight or flight and rest and digest. But it kind of bounces back and forth. Like, you're never just going to be right there where your heart rate is right there all the time. And then the next time it's different. So it's a more like getting acquainted, like, and this is where, for me, it's a lot like balance or stability training on a slack line or an unstable surface, because you have these two counters where you try to just have them balance, or it's like driving a car. If you just held the wheel straight and you death grip it, you're going to go off the road. You relax. And there's a lot of this, right? And when you're in flow driving, there's a lot of like head bobbing and like other stuff going on, right? So that's how it is with your nervous system too. It should never be rigid. It should always adapt to the situation, and you should steer it. So you can think of your heart rate, or like the sympathetic fight or flight is the gas pedal, and you can think of rest and relax, rest and digest as the brakes, the brake pedal. And you can think of flow as coasting, which it does feel like. Typically, like you're like, I'm just coasting. We want to stay here. This is a good speed.
Yep.
Right? But to get to that coasting speed is a lot of like gas up a hill and then brake and turn and then like coast. Yeah. So that's one way I like to look at it. But training, if you want to train like serious, take your training seriously, I would look into everything: biofeedback, HRV, and the nervous system. I'd really start to read up and understand how the nervous system works, because the same mechanisms work with trauma too, and helping reprogram trauma, which I don't know as much about. I'm not that kind of therapist, but I have started to really research how flow can be therapeutic, how it can be applied in a therapeutic way, which is where a lot of the plant medicines and psychedelics kind of come in. But I'm curious if I answered your question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and that's kind of the idea around resistance, is like resistance and the nervous system and that just tension, that just hold on. I can't let go. I'm so stressed out. I'm trying to figure things out. It basically just blocks, if we want to call it high performance, if we want to call it flow state, it blocks a rich experience, to put it more simply. And so I think that's, kind of the big thing. And I think that, place that I wanted to go with this is gamifying our lives. And so using this process, using these principles to try to get ourselves into developing these altered traits, to really take advantage of these altered states. And so there's a quote in your book that I wanted to read. I don't even know if it's your quote actually, but I think it's you, because it didn't have quotes around it. It says, you have amazing quotes in your book, by the way. Like, I love, dude, it was like hard just to stop reading past the quotes. Like, so good. So, but this one says, boredom is everywhere, and it's a byproduct of poorly structured systems. And so this is big to me, because I'm getting a master's degree in sociology right now. For the main understanding of that is like, we have these systems in place where we're not really allowing people to perform their best. We're not really creating environments when people are able to be themselves, to learn, to grow, to expand, to play, to have fun. We're like also focused on productivity and performance, and that word performance, being tainted almost, and so I'm really curious how you've kind of focused on gamifying your life, or how you might help others who come to you in these events to focus on, gamifying their lives in some way.
Yeah, good question. I'm still working on this. Some days feel fun and playful, and others days just don't. I'm also starting to have a lot more compassion for those who have real world struggles. There's a lot of serious issues happening in the world, and so you can't just tell somebody to gamify it if they're literally on dealing with life and death. So I will try to cautiously answer this question while also acknowledging those who are not at any point where they can find fun or games in this. But I will say, keep going.
Keep in mind real quick that the typical audience is going to be people that are working to optimize, are working to become their best, are working to enter into a new field, to really push themselves. They are desperate to evolve, to find this hidden potential within themselves. And so we're focusing on making it fun, to improve, to learn, to experiment,
Yeah. And there's some actually good books on this. One that comes to mind is called Game Frame. But like how to actually gamify, how to take the principles of gamification and apply it to your life. But what I've found that helps absolutely the most is to really try to prioritize certain things. So novelty for me is a priority, and that doesn't mean that I'm gonna always choose novelty, especially because working hard for a long time at something is important. But if there's ever an opportunity for something to be novel and new, and that doesn't mean I go do like the craziest shit. It literally means that I try to do it differently. So seeking novelty in everything I do. So if I already did it that way, I'm going to try to do it slightly differently. And that provides lots of learning, constant learning. Like I'm never afraid I'm going to stagnate, because that would be not novel. So
That's huge. I want to chime in. I want to chime in on that real quick too,
uh-huh.
because for me, being a really rational person, I always think about all the different connections I'm building by doing something novel, by using my left hand instead of my right hand, by going a different route.
Mm.
Like I see the actual physical correlate of, wow, I'm developing my brain by changing the thing I'm doing, by focusing and learning something new.
Absolutely. Changing your brain is everything. So I seek I seek novel experiences that put me in a state that I call baby brain. And this is why I'm drawn to altered states in the form of molecularly changing my actual state of consciousness, because I do feel it puts me in a baby brain state at times. Now, baby brain is not always good, but boy, if you are stuck in any place in your life and you can figure out how to go baby brain for a minute. And what I mean by that is you're going beyond deep sleep dreaming states. You're going into like deeper realms that like are so bizarre that you don't know what was what, but you come back and you go, I'm going to journal, and you're like, start to make sense of what it means for you and all that. But really, cause like babies are so wide eyed and new and everything's new to them. And like, it's a state of awe and amazement. And so a lot of time in nature, I spend lots of time, as much time in nature as I can, and really try to be quiet in nature. It's not just spending time walking through the woods with my friends who have a speaker blasting music. It's like,
Yeah.
no,
Okay.
we have some of that maybe, but then we also have lots of time where everybody's quiet and we're just presently communing with nature, stuff like that. And then I think I don't know when it was probably during COVID. I had a really hard time closing my business after the pandemic really took its toll. I had to make some serious decisions on how I wanted my life to go next, if I wanted to rebuild from scratch or if I wanted to step into something new. And though that was like one of the toughest decisions of my life, because what I had was pretty good and rebuilding was like, okay, like I did it before, let's do it again. But the something new is terrifying and unknown, and I really sat with it. And I remember having even a mushroom journey that gave me some visions. And visions aren't ever, I always take visions with a grain of salt. You'll never hear me proselytizing that I had a vision of X, Y, or Z, because it's like, no. It could mean whatever, but the meaning I found from it was that there is so much more in the unknown that you haven't tapped into, that going to something you already know isn't going to bring, but going the other direction is going to open some doors. So I dug deep and I made the decision to close my business, and I packed everything into an old camper and we took off, freaking heading out to try to find what was next.
Jeez.
All that aside, all those details, that whole story coming years round to where I am now has really just showed me that surrendering to the unknown, surrendering to the great unknown, meaning like the universal unknown, to like some grand plan, has opened doors I could have never imagined. And there's a book that I'll make one more book recommendation that I think
Please
everyone
do.
has to read. This book. Again, it's this big. It's so worth it. It's called The Surrender Experiment
Yeah.
by
I love that
Michael
one.
Singer. Man, he's got another book too. But this one, The
The
Surrender
Untethered Soul.
Experiment.
The
Yeah,
Untethered
yeah.
Soul. Yeah.
Yeah,
The
it
more
changed my
popular
life.
one. I like the Trender Experiment even better, to be honest.
I do too, because it's his life journey and learning how
Yeah.
to surrender to the universe and why it was so beneficial. And so I read that book on that in that time period where I closed my business and I just set out into the unknown and I surrendered. And I was really like, no, I'm really going to do this. And everybody's like, holy cow, you're like way out there. And I was like, I know, I got no tether back. I got nothing. I got no lifeboat. And really amazing things happened. I met such amazing people. My partner now, Kat. I used to say I'm homeless. Now I say I'm home blessed. And it
Nice.
changed everything. And ultimately, I guess my biggest takeaway is you can always force your own flow. I did that for years. That's like all my 20s were. It was like, let's go do this. Now let's go do that. Now let's do this. And it's like, it was a lot of what I wanted to do. It was a lot of forcing flow into my life, making sure I had the space for it, saying no to things so that I could go do this thing. And then now, especially with like a lot of the ceremonies with the plants and the plant teachers and the way that they teach being so subtle and rippling into your life, and the synchronicities and the happenstances and everything, it's like, wow, I think there's a greater flow that if you can align yourself with in whatever way is right for you at the time in your life, being a peak performer or not even understanding what that is, if you align yourself to something greater, a greater flow, then I do think that all the rest starts to come much, much easier. And I think the greatest flow masters of all are, they were the Zen masters, they were the sages, Buddha and Jesus even, right? Some of these, I call them flow bros even. Like these
Nice.
guys had it down. For whatever reason, are no longer around. But what is here is our breadcrumbs and all the little magical molecules that we can now then experiment to recover a lot of the great wisdom, and to remember like who we really are. So I think like no matter which direction you go, if the intention is to grow, you will.
See, that's exactly why I needed to talk to you, because your willingness to explore, to experiment is something that, I've been behind my desk literally and figuratively, just studying and researching. And so, that's another thing that was mentioned in my personal favorite book is The Greatest Power in the Universe. And how he talks about how much work he did to learn the science of everything. So he felt like he did have that tether in reality. And so he needed to then, pursue all the spirituality stuff, all of the unknown, the things that are, subjective, phenomenological, and so I feel like that's where I'm at right now, where it's like, okay, well, I need to get myself out in the world. I need to begin experimenting, to explore, because I'm very rooted. And I think a lot of other people are very rooted in reality as well. And so before we started this podcast, we talked about, how out there, your work can go, and how being rooted in reality is something that we can challenge ultimately. And I've even heard, stories of the incredibly rich experiences that people have on plant medicines, how they would say it felt more real than anything they've experienced in real life. And so I kind of wanted to potentially wrap it up here by asking you if you're willing to share any of your experiences on plant medicine, and if you've had those types of experiences where it potentially felt more real to be in a psychedelic experience than it ever has you've ever experienced in real life, and maybe something you've gleaned from that.
Yeah, it's funny how people, myself included, have a hard time talking about things that are difficult to talk about, and we stumble our way through. So I'll try to do that as well. I read up a lot about other people's ways to describe it, but there's only one word that's ever really stuck out to me. It's the word noetic. Noetic quality, or like a qualia or an essence, is in a noetic way, is a deep knowing that doesn't actually need words. It's like effervescence. It's like so beyond what we could ever put words to. But noetic is like just a deep, deep knowing. And so most of my experiences, as far out, bizarre, weird, out of this world, or in different realms as they are always end up bringing me back to deep truths that I already knew, that when you uncover them, you laugh out loud. You sometimes hysterically, you just like, it's so obvious. How did I get so caught up? What? How did nobody slap me and tell me this? Like, oh, it's so obvious, because most of what I experience are paradoxes, and everything is paradoxical. And so, from what I understand, because I haven't spent my years on my mat meditating, but from what I understand, when you meditate, you are swiping thoughts, and you are going for this place of this nothingness. Sometimes it's white light. It's very simple. You're really trying to clear away and just be with nothing, be in this simplicity. So there's that, right? That is there's so much to be gleaned, benefited, insights come from it. Like, you have full on mystical experiences. That is a direction to go. The psychedelic direction is the opposite, in where it is those realms are full of stuff. Like, it's not nothing there. You don't eat a mushroom and just sit with a simple white light. You might have that experience on mushrooms too. It does happen. But most of what happens is just so bizarrely indescribable, but it brings feelings. It brings up emotions, sometimes 3 at once, where you're like, oh, I'm angry and happy and I'm hungry. You're like, it's so much at once. It's so much that it's often very difficult to even come back and say, even tell anyone about it, which is why having community, integration circles, working with even therapists who can speak the language and stuff is really important. But really, what I've come back with are always just profound insights about myself, my life, and how I can better show up. I get to go through I get to watch my ego and see how my ego did that to that person, and how I chose selfishly in this way. And like, there's your lessons. And that's why I do view them as plant teachers, because every time, even in the like the straight out of a sci-fi movie visions, comes these feelings of like, oh, this is what religion tried to give us. Oh, this is what that book meant. It's just like aha moment after aha moment after aha moment. So I don't have a lot of like crazy stories of like, this happened and that happened. Like, they're all over YouTube. They're crazy, but I don't actually think that that's the juicy stuff. I think the real juicy stuff, the takeaways, the stuff that I look for now, is the noetic qualities, the deep truths that I already knew, that I just needed a plant molecule to come in and take away all my stresses and worries for a moment, and allow my ego to just sit there quietly and observe and be in that place with a lot of my own shit. So I get to sit there, I sift through it, I see it, I recognize it, I forgive it, I heal it through giving it love. And I always come out the other end going, yeah, it's going to be hard not telling everyone they need to go do that.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Gosh. So if you're willing to talk about, even for a second, why do you think this is so needed right now? And where do you see this going and evolving into?
That is the $1 million question. I think we are in a very awkward early learning stages of this. Thank God we made it through the 60s and 70s when it almost went off the tracks. I think that back then it was so much what we needed that those who really preached it, like you said, Ram Dass, and he's a controversial figure, and so all of them were back then, and they took it to the extreme, and our government was like, and we're done. So for 30 plus years, it had to go underground, where I believe there was a bit of like an incubation and some really underground experimentation and a lot of like real research even, but anecdotal coming out, which we then now are finally starting, the universities and everything is starting to come around with more of this hard research that's showing the benefit of it and all this. But in reality, for me, looking at the big picture of like, okay, these are ancient technologies. I mean, you want to talk about shamanism? That's been going on since humans have been around. That's like the first doctors were shamans. So you look from an anthropological standpoint, this is so ancient. You have to, I mean, there's even books about The Food of the Gods by Terence McKenna. That's just like mind-blowingly, like feels like it could be very true that these molecules have given us language, the ability to communicate, and that these are pulling us out of lower levels of consciousness, helping us elevate to be able to have better language communication. Basically, the ideas that Terence McKenna brings, I love, because it's so positive. How we might be in a pretty messed up situation now, but in the grand scheme of things, we're so much further along the evolutionary spectrum that only a couple more shifts in the way that our species sees ourselves. So instead of being homicidal maniacs, being caretakers and stewards of the planet, away from actually getting this down. Like, we're pretty freaking closer than we've ever been, especially like the dark ages and like really dark times. It's still weighing on us. We still have it in our blood to go to war all the time, but man, are we also tapping into something huge here. And we tried to tap into it in the 60s, and look what, like, that was like a big, like, oh, slow it down, oh, squash it, and so now it's here, but we can, instead of just ripping the lids off Pandora's box, which we did in the late 50s, 60s, and 70s, and they tried to put it back, we can now more gracefully approach these things from, yes, a scientific place where people can feel better because they understand the science behind it, but also from a place of like meeting the indigenous wisdom keepers who've kept this alive while they've been prosecuted in all parts of the planet. They've kept it alive, and now it's coming, and meet them with respect and receive what I believe are plant medicines, these molecules, for actually overcoming the conditioning that is mainly in the West, devoid of deep spiritual roots like the East, but really, for me, missing connection to nature, connection to each other, connection to something spiritual. And I think having cut ourselves off from meaning, and this again is one of my favorite author, Jamie Wheel, writes about this in Recapture the Rapture. He says that we lost meaning, that there were a couple versions that gave the world most of its meaning. Mythology was one, and we're really cut off from mythology in the West. We're cut off from myths and lore, and like, we used to really believe the Greeks. So we come from like science. All of this comes from the Greeks, at least in the West, but we don't believe in the Greek gods. Like, they were cut off from that. So like, we're missing a lot of
1.0.
Meaning 1.0. And then religion came around and really tried. And man, I was religious until I was in my 20s. And I got so much out of it as a kid because of the community and because of feeling connected, right? And then realizing that, oh, I'm just part of a club, and there's all these other clubs, and they're separate from one another. We all know that we're eagerly awaiting another higher meaning here. And so instead of giving away all our power to everything, oh, like, they'll take care of it, like, oh, like, Jesus will come back. He's coming again. Okay, we can give our power away, but instead we can also take it, and we can start to really have direct experience, which requires experimentation and self experimentation. It requires you to go out and do the thing yourself. But direct experience seems to be what's absolutely missing. Direct experience to the divine, to something higher, because we were promised it from day one. And maybe the ancients used to have it and then we forgot. And now we're in a place where people, I think, are really craving that direct experience that makes them come alive again and makes all their worries wash away, because ultimately this is the Garden of Eden and it is perfect. Those insights lie on the other side of our fears, our stress, our anxiety, our depression, our trauma. But we have to work through that to get back to the place where that simple truth can fully come through again, and where we can love ourselves so that we can then love others. So the plants have taught me that, and I am very grateful for it.
Absolutely. See, and I don't know if you've heard of Gaber Mate, but
Yeah, I just ordered his One River book.
Yeah, the Myth of Normal I have, and
Yeah.
yeah, so it's like he talks about how the stuff's been around forever, and we even have the science on it, which is funny, but we don't integrate that. We don't integrate that into our current model, and so that's where we can kind of get into the negative side of things, of what's being suppressed and held down. I don't really like to go there too much, but we both know it's there. I think everyone kind of knows it's there. And so moving forward into this place of independence, where we have a lot more of these, people and or retreat, companies, whatever you want to call it, that are providing these, these science-backed things that are working to give people that direct experience, so that they're feeling like, okay, yes, this is rooted in reality, and I know this is going to work to help my performance. But ultimately having it have almost the opposite effect, where it's like it gets people to realize, like, wow, I've been in the rat race. So, wow, I've just been like going hard. And it was the same experience I had when I was like bodybuilding. It's like, wow, okay, I'm like kind of got past the vain stage of this. Like, I guess I was going for trying to impress people. That was a big motivator for me. And how do I like reevaluate why I'm doing what I'm doing in life, and how do I really kind of let go and find myself? And I think a lot of people are needing that right now. I think a lot of people are, like I said, even before this podcast, choosing jobs that they're not happy with, choosing jobs because it's a good job, and not knowing how to find flow in their life, and then using substances to get themselves from that beta place down to a theta, down to somewhere where it feels very good, where that front portion of their brain turns off, where they stop being so critical. It's mostly done through alcohol or weed or some sort of thing, as opposed to being done more holistically, more naturally, getting out in nature and experiencing things. And that is an incredibly detrimental path, especially when it's being backed by the medical industry.
And that really right there is something that's the downside to this too. You got to watch out for, is that the West will always commercialize. That's just where we're at. That is the name of the game. And so what's happening with these healing modalities, these plant medicines, is they are being commercialized, for better or for worse. If that's pulling tribes out of poverty, I'm grateful for it. But if it's lining the pockets of corporations, then I hate it. So I'm torn. It's both good and bad. I see both. And I think what we really need to focus on next is integration. You mentioned that, because if you just keep going back for next and the next and the next, then you're not actually cultivating traits. You're chasing states. And that's really why at the beginning of the playbook I put out, it goes over the difference of states and traits. And that's why
that's powerful. I'm gonna repeat that real quick. You're not actually trying to change your traits. You are focusing on chasing altered states. And so I think a lot of people are really going for that.
It's the downside, I mean, that's what Stephen Kotler calls flow junkies. Jamie Wheel calls it the dark side of flow. It's addiction. It's like, okay, we want to escape normal waking consciousness. It's what did they say in that book? $3 trillion industry is like getting out of our normal waking state.
Altered states economy.
Altered states economy. It's a whole thing. And so we got to watch out for this. Same with the ceremonies and the plant medicines and healing. The healing journey is like, it's not a trait until you don't need medicine. So what are you
True.
going to take away? How are you going to integrate this and become that better person? Because like what really is happening, I think, is that we glimpse our highest selves. It doesn't mean we become them. And then when you identify with that and you get caught up in it, you might end up tripping yourself up. And this is actually where the Buddhists will warn you about psychedelics. Typically, they seem to be really like against creating a false enlightenment to where you think because every time you take your microdose you feel better that you're enlightened. It's like, no. And you can actually walk away with quite a god complex or a spiritual ego or straight up narcissism. It's very prevalent within the plant medicine communities because people are not integrating back into society, understanding how the experience plays into their life and what they need to do to show up as a better person. So there's a bit of like, yeah, like a slippery slope there with any of these, by the way, non-psychedelic altered states and full-on therapies as well, is you can get real caught up that the therapy is actually the thing keeping you going. And then all of a sudden it's not a therapy anymore. It's actually like a crutch, right? So we have to watch out for that. But ultimately, if you are, again, if you're seeking growth, even if you get caught up in a cult like I did, you'll realize it because you're there to grow. It's when you give your power away to the cult leaders that you're going to end up 20 years down the road going, what happened? Is like, well, you lost sight of the growth that you were there looking for in the beginning. And so constantly coming back as like a beginner. So and what I do to make this really simple and tangible for people is when I have a sacred sacrament in my hands, I'm about to ingest it. I ask it to teach me, and I remind it and myself that I would like to grow. So I always say, I'm here to learn and grow. Please teach me what I need to learn so that I may grow. It's my simple mantra, and it keeps my intention really, really simple, and it allows for the universe and that molecule, that spirit molecule, if you will, to actually do the magic. I have to believe in it enough, so I have to release my I'm gonna do this, and I have to say I'm just here to learn and grow. And I've had a lot of learning and growth from it, and it doesn't seem to ever have any end in sight. There's always more to be had as far as learning and growing. But then I have to always remind myself, well, the real work is in my daily grind, in my waking state, when I'm hangry. That's the real work. When I'm around my family, at Christmas or Thanksgiving time, and they bring up something I don't like, it's like, that's the real work. And so if I'm not doing that, then I'm not learning and growing.
And then I guess the final thing here, I'm curious then, how are you integrating this into a vision of some sort? What is your vision for Flow and Flow Labs, Flow Lab collabs and podcast, and what do you hope to kind of accomplish, and show people or help people with, or just, get through and to use this information in daily life?
That's probably the toughest question for me to answer, because if you didn't notice, I didn't talk about Flow Lab once.
Yeah.
I'm at a place now where it seems like the universe has been wearing me down to get me to really learn a lesson. There's a real lesson coming through in the last couple ceremonies I had that it's taken me 3 years to see that this is possibly what's happening. I'm a doer, and I used to believe there's only 2 types of people, doers and don'ters. It's a very narrow worldview that I no longer have, but I always identified as a doer, which means that I get my self-worth from doing things. And it doesn't really matter what I do. As long as I'm doing something that feels productive, I feel happiness. when things get hard, it's because I can't do the things that I feel like I must or should or want to do. I really struggle mentally when I hit places or points where I can no longer do much at all. So I have had the universe really push me in different directions that has helped me see that the less I do, the more the universe does. And so I had Flow Lab come from conversations with close friends that were collaborators in the beginning. They really put in a lot of energy, and I'm so grateful for them because it wouldn't have happened without them. And then their lives went in different directions, and one collaborator after another separated and left me with what I felt like was the vision without like the blueprint without the actual wheels and spokes and gears and fuel and mechanisms of any kind. I felt very like, oh well, we got the vision, and all the collaborators stepped away. Okay. So I put it down about a year ago. I put it down very, very much. I had felt like I no longer could do much to make anything of it. And so I set it down. The moment I set it down, the universe gave me an opportunity to work with somebody very special that's still coming. So I'm not going to mention who, but that showed me that if I try to label it and identify with it as Flow Lab, that I'm going to get caught up again and again in what I want to happen with it. And it's starting to really appear that if I can give it the push and give it the energy and then put it down and then say, okay, it's here for whatever universe you can do, work your magic. And then I can go over here and work on this. So like right now, I'm not even working really on Flow Lab, and yet the magic is still there. Something's happening. I don't know. It's like it's a subtle thing. I'm excited to see where it goes next, but I have zero, I can't tell you. I just can't tell you where I would want it to go next, because I'm trying so hard not to put my wants and needs into it, because every time I do that, I get really identified and caught up in it. So right now I'm in a really awkward point where I feel it is like I can feel it almost as if it's happened already, and I hold that vision. And I don't know what happened already means. I can't tell you the details of that, other than like something beautiful might come of it. So I hold that vision. Well, at the same
feelings,
time,
the acting as if.
yeah, and at that same time, I'm putting in work into areas that are really difficult, like a job that makes me money but doesn't seem to have much of a future. Like, it's not my career, I'll tell you that. Or yeah, another project, which is a passion of mine. I'd love it to make me money, but it seems like every time I try to commercialize it, it turns on me, and it's so hard to like commercialize. So I'm learning how to surrender to the universe's timeline and the beauty and magic that it brings when I can just step out of my own way. And that really might be the whole point of my work with flow. Like I can't even tell you if I'm going to stay the same like flow bro where everybody gets some sort of like version of flow from me, because one day I might just not relate to it as in the same capacity. So I'm finding the less I identify with these things and stop branding them, because I was like branding it and making stickers and shirts and everything. The more that I'm just like, no, that's there. It's got a thing. It's got a shell. The more the universe starts to fill it and animate it. And it's starting to like almost take a life of its own. So there's opportunities coming, and I just want to hold space for them without forcing my will. It's a tough one.
I love that answer. I love that answer actually, because that's exactly kind of what even the evolving potential is about, is understanding that sometimes it's a passive process. Sometimes it's utilizing the power of the subconscious mind and letting it just be worked on outside of, you know, your conscious
Mhm.
effort, the conscious and then being identified with it. Cause I'm literally the same with that, where it's like, I'm doing. And then I'm trying to like create a vision and I'm trying to stick to it. And then even when it doesn't, you know, really resonate anymore, it's like, well, I said I was going to do this, you know? And so I think that's you know, I really kind of come back to Ralph Waldo Emerson's, you know, words about like thinking what you think today in hard words and thinking what you think tomorrow in hard words, even if it contradicts what you said yesterday, you know? And so that open-mindedness is 100% necessary for really kind of allowing yourself to fall into the right path while chasing the joy, the passion, you know, all those things that really kind of light you up and keep you going, that ultimately bring happiness more so than even me grinding every day and having a six
Mhm.
pack and, you know, being a, you know, great example of high performance. You know, it's like, am I happy though? You know, am I happy? And so if I can really kind of let go
Mhm.
and find that place of happiness and joy and peace, which I sometimes don't let myself feel because I feel like I haven't earned it, you know? And so I think that's, you
Mhm.
know, one thing that have had to come to terms with is like all these talks to my wife and imagining my own vision. It's like, are you able to actually experience bliss and joy and peace, you know, or is that just a fleeting, you know, thing that I'll experience one day in the future once I do this and once I do that and once I do this, you know? And so for
Mhm.
me to let go myself has been a very similar experience. It's actually led me into more work, which is funny because I've like let go of. I was a personal trainer as well, and I was a nutrition coach, and I was trying to run these businesses, and I didn't have good systems, and I was running myself into the ground. And ultimately, I decided to let go and just focus on what I wanted to focus on: read books and hang out and find joy. And it led me into this, and here I am now. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, I'm doing more work than I've ever done, but it doesn't feel like it really, and that's pretty awesome. So
Mm.
you were just the person I
Absolutely.
wanted to talk to about all this, and this has been perfect. And I'll probably have you on the podcast again because it'll be really interesting to see where your journey takes you. You know.
Hell yeah. And I'm really excited to see that as well. I was just thinking how in high school we used to say, or I don't know, I used to write in people's yearbooks, never change. And it's cracking me up because it's like the only constant in the universe is change. And if we talk about evolution, then you better change. Like that's the point. So
Yes.
I look forward to change. I invite the challenges. I'm all about learning lessons and remaining a student, a lifelong student. And so I think I mean not if I think that being the idea, the intention behind this podcast is going to have some serious energy and magic behind it. So yeah, I'd love to be on it again in the future, whenever, and catch up. And I'd love to have you in Costa Rica one day.
Yeah, man, I'm down. I'm down. I just got to get my T's crossed and I's dotted financially. But yeah, I mean, this is, you know, grad school and everything. But I'm very much wanting to explore, to get out there, to get into the field, you know, get out of behind the desk. So I would love that. It's been a pleasure
Yeah,
talking
well,
with you.
we meet where we are, and it's always beautiful. So thanks for taking the time and offering this opportunity for me just to speak openly. I really appreciate it, and look forward to hearing all the other guests that you've had on when you release them.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much for being here, and we'll definitely be in touch. We'll definitely be talking more, and good luck with all of your current and future endeavors.
Likewise. Talk later.
All right, bro.